Willow House stood on a hill, its shadows stretching long and ominous across the landscape. It was tall and dark, a foreboding presence that loomed over the town below. The windows were like eyes, cold and unblinking, staring out into the world with a haunting intensity. They seemed to watch everything, as if the house itself was alive, aware of every movement and sound. People said the house was sad, that it carried a heavy, sorrowful aura that could be felt by anyone who approached. They said bad things happened there, that the walls had witnessed unspeakable horrors and tragedies. A family lived there long ago, a family whose name had been forgotten by time. One day they were gone. Nobody knew why. They vanished without a trace, leaving behind only questions and fear. Some said they still heard the family inside, their voices carried on the wind, whispers and cries that sent shivers down the spine. They heard whispers and cries. Willow House was quiet, but the silence was filled with an eerie tension, as if the house was holding its breath. But it was not empty. The air was thick with a sinister atmosphere, a feeling that something unseen was always watching, waiting. Sarah needed a new home. She found Willow House. It was big and beautiful, but it was also cheap. Sarah didn't know its story. She didn't know about the sadness. Sarah moved in. She felt happy. The house was hers. She started to unpack, but she felt cold. A cold wind blew through the house. Sarah felt scared. She was alone. Night came. The house was quiet. Sarah tried to sleep, but she heard something. It was a whisper. It came from the hallway. Sarah was scared. She listened. The whisper came again. It sounded like her name. Sarah slowly opened her door. She looked into the hallway. It was dark and empty, but the whispering continued. The next day, Sarah heard noises. They came from the attic. She slowly climbed the stairs. The attic door was open. Sarah looked inside. There was a box in the middle of the room. Sarah walked to the box. She opened it. Inside, she found old photos. They were pictures of the family who lived there before, the family who disappeared. Sarah looked at a photo of a little girl. The girl in the picture started to cry. The sound was eerie, echoing through the dimly lit attic. Sarah's heart pounded as she tried to make sense of what she was seeing. The tears in the photo seemed almost real, glistening as they rolled down the girl's cheeks. Sarah dropped the photo in shock. She wanted to leave the attic immediately, but as she turned to the door, it slammed shut with a deafening bang. A shadowy figure loomed behind it, sending chills down her spine. She felt a cold sweat break out on her forehead. Sarah was trapped. Panic set in as she pulled on the doorknob with all her might. It wouldn't open. The door seemed to be locked by an unseen force. She could feel the walls closing in on her, the air growing colder by the second. Desperation took over. Sarah kicked the door repeatedly, her screams echoing in the confined space, but nobody could hear her. The attic seemed to swallow her cries, leaving her in a suffocating silence. Her voice grew hoarse and her legs felt weak. She was alone in the attic with the crying child in the photo. The image haunted her, the girl's eyes following her every move. Sarah felt a deep sense of dread, realizing she might never escape this nightmare. The attic was not just a room, it was a prison of her own fears. Suddenly, the crying stopped. The silence was deafening, filling the room with an eerie stillness that made Sarah's skin crawl. She had been hearing the cries for days, echoing through the empty halls of Willow House. But now, there was nothing. Sarah looked at the photo. It was old and faded, showing a little girl with sad eyes. The girl seemed to be staring right at her, as if trying to communicate something important. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The little girl was gone. Sarah had seen her just moments ago standing in the corner of the room. Now there was only an empty space where the girl had been. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. Sarah heard a whisper behind her. It was faint, almost like a breath, but unmistakable. She turned slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. It was the little girl's voice. It said, "Run!" Sarah turned around. The urgency in the whisper sent a wave of fear through her. She knew she had to get out of there, but her legs felt like they were made of lead. Standing there was the little girl from the photo. Sarah was terrified. The girl's eyes were filled with sorrow and desperation. She reached out a hand as if pleading for help, but Sarah couldn't move. She kicked the door again. Her foot connected with a loud thud, but the door didn't budge. Panic set in as she realized she might be trapped. This time it flew open. Sarah ran. She didn't look back. Her only thought was to get as far away from the house as possible. She ran out of the attic. The narrow stairs seemed to stretch on forever, but she didn't stop. The whispers followed her, growing louder and more insistent. She ran out of the house. The cold night air hit her like a wall, but she kept running. The house loomed behind her, dark and menacing. Sarah never went back to Willow House. The memories of that night haunted her, but she knew she'd escaped something truly evil. The house stood on the hill, dark, empty and waiting. It seemed to watch her as she walked away, its windows like eyes following her every move. But Sarah didn't look back. She was free.